Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations number 38. I'm your host, Joe Hannon. I'm back in a big way. As you can see, my face is all kinds of messed up. This is not from World Master. This is from a knee I took to the eye last Thursday training. Luckily, not an orbital fracture, but torn cornea, which is now feeling much better. This past weekend from Friday to Sunday afternoon, I spent most of it in my bedroom with the blinds closed and sunglasses on because I couldn't stand any sort of light in my eyes whatsoever. So market improvement from there. Unfortunately, my optometrist was not available until Monday, and by the time I got to the office on Monday, the corneal abrasion had healed so much so that it was too small to use what they call a bandage, which is essentially a contact lens without magnification that they put over it to help it heal and ease the pain a bit. So I had ground it out that far, and there was nothing they could do for me at that point except tell me to keep using the antibiotic goop that they gave me at the emergency room to keep putting in my eye to let it heal. So yeah, I had a lot of time in the dark to think. I listened to a lot of the Alan Watts podcast called Being in the Way, I believe is the name of it. Tremendous series of recordings from Watts over the course of his career talking about all sorts of things from Taoism to Buddhism. Currently listening to a fantastic episode where he's lecturing to a group of psychiatrists and therapists about the dangers of being sort of the official arbiters of mental health and how they've essentially created another priestly class. And he's doing it in his typical spiritual clown way of making it extremely funny and using humor to kind of bring a level of self-awareness to the whole situation that wouldn't be accessible otherwise. So that's what I've been up to. Yeah, kind of just dealing with that. I watched, been meaning to watch this for a long time. The original 47 Ronin samurai film, which I want to say was made in 1941. It's about 4 hours long. I had watched the first 2 hours maybe a few months back, and it was a perfect opportunity to revisit it. I just kept my sunglasses on, stayed in the dark, and bumped the contrast of my MacBook screen all the way down as low as it would go. And it added sort of an added layer of noir to an already noirish feeling film. What a beautiful movie. I mean, culturally insightful in terms of the Japanese value system, but just lots of long, lingering shots on these beautifully designed sets, kind of stuff you don't see anymore thanks to the advent of CGI. People actually had to make things and make them look beautiful on film. But the way that the director played with shadow and light was just so striking. I hadn't really seen anything like that, frankly, since I watched Citizen Kane. Really cool film. Highly recommend it. It's on YouTube. You can watch it for free. You just need 4 hours. But yeah, the real reason why you're here is not for me to share my views on cinema from the 1940s, at least I think. It's to talk about jiu-jitsu, so I should probably do that a bit. This week's episode is mostly going to be a reflection on the lessons from World Master. But as always, we'll kick things off with a short meditation that I wrote leading up to World Master, and maybe that'll bring us into a logical segue for the unpacking of what happened. Maybe it won't. I don't know. Either way, I wrote the damn thing, so I'm going to share it with you. This is BJJ Meditation number 38, and it's called BJJ in a Bottle. We strive to contain what can't be contained, to control what can't be controlled. But we can't bottle the ocean. We can't trap a feeling under glass. We long for release, but release is something we must give ourselves. And it's a gift that's available whenever we are ready to receive. True warriors know that they do not know this. They do not try to write it down, to bottle it up, to trap it in intellect. They simply do it. But is it really them that does it, or is it simply the doing? Yeah, so my frame of mind heading into World Master, Masters Worlds, I've heard people call it like a dozen different things, but if you actually look at what the IBJJF calls it, it's World Master, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But hey, they're the arbiters of truth on this matter, so I'm going to default to them, even if what they're saying makes very little sense. But yeah, my mindset going into Masters Worlds was to really have no mindset whatsoever, to have no expectations, to have no true plan, no true external plan in terms of this is what I'm going to do when X happens. My plan was purely internal, purely intrinsic, in the sense that I had sharpened this game for months. I had used that previous competition that we talked about a few weeks back as sort of a diagnostic to see what I might see. And I was going to use what I learned there to sharpen my game, and that was going to be it. That was my goal all along. My meta goal was to come to competition with a level of presence that I had yet to bring to bear, and hopefully a layer of ease too, because as I've said on previous episodes of this podcast, competition is kind of hellacious for me. It's not something I really look forward to. Provokes a lot of anxiety, provokes a lot of internal turmoil, provokes a lot of existential nonsense. So yeah, how could I cope with that stuff in a more constructive way? And these were the goals, because I thought that setting performance-related goals was kind of absurd. I had just gotten my black belt, and I suppose that whenever you just get your belt, you've probably ranked up to that belt level for a while, and your instructor just hasn't gotten around to like kind of awarding the belt. So I don't put too much stock in that, but nonetheless, like the fact is a fact. I had just gotten my black belt, and the black belt is the last belt that you get, excluding coral belt or whatever, but those belts are awarded based on time in the game, not necessarily skill. Anyway, black belt, last belt you get. So you very well may run up against somebody who has had their black belt as long as you've been training jiu-jitsu, which is essentially what happened to me, I think. But anyway, more on that later. So you have to acknowledge that at that level in the game, there are going to be skill deltas. There's going to be a gap between what you can bring to bear and what the other person can bring to bear. And ultimately, it's up to one person or the other to capitalize on that gap. That's a fact. There's no way around it. So yeah, setting a goal, a performance-related goal, was kind of absurd in that regard, because I had no idea who I was going to be matched up against. My goals were purely intrinsic, as I just described, and I think I delivered on those goals. This was the first competition that I went into and lost, and immediately was like checking the IBJJF calendar to see, okay, when can I get back out there? And ultimately, I lost, just like I lost in my previous competition this year, based on a technical failure. Something I was doing broke down. I fell behind, and the guy I was fighting took advantage of it. And as Coach Shane pointed out to me after the match, at this level, you just can't make mistakes. Mistakes are fatal. There's a reason why this guy's a black belt. There's a reason why you're a black belt. You're going to pounce all over that kind of an error. So it's definitely like a live and learn situation. But one of the things I recently talked about I don't know if the episode's out yet, but it's an episode within BJJ Mental Models called The Highest Levels that I do with Emily Kwok. I believe you have to be a paid subscriber to get it. But BJJ Mental Models offers a free, I think it's like 4-week trial or something like that. It's a generous offer. So if you want to go listen to that, hear me and Emily Kwok talk about this idea, and I'm about to mention briefly here, then go for it. But I think it's important to take time to come to conclusions after any kind of victory or defeat, just because they're so emotionally charged, and you can ride that emotional wave and it can kind of propel you in the wrong direction if you're not careful. You could oversteer. For example, I lost because I think I fell into a leg drag position, and I defended the leg drag. Leg drag really creates a dilemma. You're either going to lay flat and give up the pass, or you're going to turn and you're going to give up your back. There's really no good thing to do. So I kind of sat up on my elbow and framed hard with my other elbow against the guy's shoulder, chest, neck area, and that he took my back and was able to quickly sink in the rear naked choke because my other elbow was locked onto the floor, bridging me up. So I could have thought about that in the moment and just said like, okay, I'm going to spend the next 6 months dissecting that position and creating scenarios where like it never happens again. Be carried by the emotional inertia of that loss into oversteering and perhaps squandering precious time in getting ready for whatever the next competition is. So I think it's really important to take time and come to conclusions. So actually, like, I fought 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I don't know. Time is kind of lost its meaning when you spend several days in a cave. Like Aaron Rodgers on his darkness retreat. Interesting parallel there. Was in the dark. The same weekend, Aaron Rodgers blew out his Achilles tendon. Anyway, I digress. Yeah, so I took 2 weeks before I went back and watched the footage, and ultimately, I think what cost me the match is I had the guy's guard passed twice, but I didn't solidify the pass. I didn't solidify the pass because I've been getting kind of lazy about not lowering my upper body enough, and instead of just solidifying side control, kind of looking for like a quick knee on belly. And I think, had I passed properly, had I passed with more technical acumen, I could have secured side control and been on up points. And then who knows what would have happened from there. It's kind of one of those situations where you have, like, if you have 2 black belts of equal size and equal skill, it's going to be really hard to escape that leg drag position. It's going to be really hard to escape that side control too. I mean, side control is like a miserable position. But anyway, I got to tip my cap to my opponent, Sam Snow. He's a guy who trains at a Gracie Baja in Texas somewhere. I want to say Arlington. I was reading a bit about him after the match, and seems like just an amazing guy. Does a lot of good in his community. Does a lot of good for jiu-jitsu. And that's the kind of person I'd prefer to lose to, frankly, rather than losing to a total asshole. I think all of us can probably relate to that. He seems like a good guy and a good instructor, and hats off to him. He carried the day. I think he was the 9 seed, and I was like the 49th seed or something like that too. So, but yeah, it's important not to weight too heavily on things in the immediate aftermath of a defeat like this. It's better to kind of take time, let things mellow out a bit, and then come to an appropriate conclusion, which is what I've done here, I think. But yeah, I'm really much of the mindset that, like, okay, it's time to get on to the next one. It's time to learn from this experience, and it's time to keep going. And first competition as a black belt happens to be, like, arguably the biggest competition that I can do as someone my age. And to step out on the stage and to be able to execute on the things that I've been training the past few months, and to be able to comport myself well and to be able to enjoy the experience, man, those are all wins in my book. And I'm not one to sort of hop on the win or learn bandwagon, or, like, there's no such thing as losing. Like, no, there are very real outcomes here. I definitely lost my match. I definitely wanted to win a gold medal. I always do. But I think it's important to kind of keep these things in perspective, right? Like, the beauty of a competition like Masters is that most of the people who are competing, they're not competing for their careers. They're not competing to make their next instructional cell. They're not competing to make their podcast grow in listeners, right? They're competing for this purely intrinsic love of the sport. And that kind of permeates the air. And it's just an amazing thing to be able to be fortunate enough to have the resources to travel to a place as weird as Las Vegas, to be able to compete at such a well-organized, well-run event, and to be with people who just genuinely appreciate the game. Very different energy from, like, say, going to the New York Open or the Atlanta Open and watching the people in the adult division, and just the turmoil and the anguish that comes from that experience, along with the highs as well. But I feel like it's really misplaced energetically and just mentally to get too down on one's performance if you're in, like, a similar state walk of life as I am. My friend Colin Weimer, who I'm hoping to have on the podcast to discuss this very subject, hopefully this week or perhaps next week, came up with this beautiful language around what I'm describing. And he said, there are no sad stories. The story we tell ourselves about our experiences in competitions, especially competitions like Masters World, is indeed a story. It's a fiction of our own creation. And we can kind of layer whatever meaning we want to on top of that experience. So you can attach meaning to the outcome, or you can attach meaning to the quality of the experience from start to finish, or you could do both. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what I'm doing. I'm attaching meaning to the outcome. Okay, here's what I can do better next time. Here's what I can do to get ready for my next competition. But also, I'm attaching meaning to the quality of the experience. And that's why I want to go out and do it again. So, really, all of us have a choice in terms of how we relate to this stuff. It can be a purely negative experience, which is bad. It could be a purely positive experience, which I think is equally bad for different reasons. Or we could kind of just take it in, just sit with it. I think in the previous episode of this podcast, I talked a little bit about that beach ball analogy, where we can look at a negative experience as this beach ball that's sitting in a pool, and we can try and suppress it or repress it and push it under the water. And all it does is churn up the water and create more turbulence. It's not super constructive. Or we can kind of just appreciate the beach ball for what it is and kind of deal with it as we want to. And that's kind of how I'm choosing to relate to this loss. Ultimately, it's, I don't know, I guess it's a loss on the IBJJF tally sheet. But to me, it's just kind of another step on the path. And I hope that's how we can all relate to this is, if I'm taking away anything from this experience of training for this competition and the outcome that I did receive, is that just don't take it too seriously. Like certainly take it seriously enough. Train like you mean it, train deliberately, practice deliberately, use feedback loops to your advantage. But you got to find the wins and the losses too. And you got to find the joy in the sorrow. I saw so many people just kind of like torn apart at this competition, just distraught for losing or not meeting their own expectations in terms of performance and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, you had enough money to fly to Las Vegas. You had enough money to prepare for this competition, to register, maybe to buy a new gi. And you're in this absolute freak show of humanity that is Las Vegas. Let's just soak that in for a minute here. Let's just appreciate that we're surrounded by these buildings that house up to 4,000 people so that they can spend money on gambling and overpriced alcohol, strippers, you name it, and just love every second of it. And, you know, the absurdity of that from an existential standpoint is quite comical. Why not just appreciate the humor in that and the beauty in that and the artistry in that? I mean, classic example of this was, I had two of my best friends out there with me, neither of whom does jujitsu. And we were, for the most part, on East Coast time. And like we went way too hard on the first night, and the second night, the second day was a bit of a recovery day. So my friend wakes up at like 3 a.m, because that's generally when he wakes up on the East Coast. So it'd be like 6 a.m. And he just decides he's going to go out and just walk around. And, in like the 3 hours that he was gone before he came back to the hotel when I was awake, he was, propositioned by a hooker. He came across the bloody aftermath of like it must have been a knife fight or something on the strip. And there were just high-heeled shoes, 2 different pairs of high-heeled shoes, and a purse just like covered in blood. He unsuccessfully tried to place a bet on a soccer match at a sports book. I want to say at one of the MGM casinos. And it's like, this is where we're doing this weird sport where we're wrestling each other in pajamas, is in this bizarre place. There's really no reason. There's no reason to be upset about anything. Like, we're here, we're enjoying this. Presumably none of us got stabbed this morning out on the strip. And if we did get stabbed on the strip this morning, my heart goes out to you. But yeah, I think it's important to kind of keep the absurdity of the whole thing in mind too. And to really realize that you get to decide the quality of the story you tell yourself about the entire experience. And the quality of of the story that I'm choosing to tell myself about my time in Las Vegas is certainly absurdity, channeling my inner Hunter S. Thompson, and gratitude too, because I got to do this amazing, weird thing, and I get to do it again. And I came out of it in one piece. I came out of it having had a good match against a good opponent, and I came out of it feeling closely bonded with my teammates. And what's not to love about all that? I think it's important for all of us to kind of keep that in mind. What else did I want to talk about? I think that's really all I have to say this week, guys. I'm going to be back next week, planning on potentially doing some more interviews on the podcast, settling back into my training routine. I don't know if you can tell, but my voice is a little rough right now because I also have some sort of upper respiratory infection. It's not COVID, tested negative for COVID. But my son had it, my wife had it, and now it's my turn. So I'm really just kind of in this reflective headspace right now. I'm limited in what I can do training-wise because of my eye, and I can't breathe. So, not a whole lot of jiu-jitsu going on here. So yeah, I'm in a good space though for creative output. It feels good to be back in front of the microphone here, talking to you all. But anyway, the usual stuff. You can read and support BJJ Meditations over on Mirror. The link is in the show notes. Best way to subscribe or to support the podcast, if you want to, is to like, subscribe, review, or share episodes. You can always follow us on Instagram for the latest updates. It's BJJ_meditations. Best way to support the podcast, other than reviewing, sharing, liking, subscribing, is to work with me in a coaching capacity. I think I've mentioned this before, but that's how I pay the bills, essentially. I'm part of a team, Josh Wadeskin's consulting team. We do work for mostly people in industry. But yeah, I've learned a lot in the 6 years I've been working for them, and I'm confident I can help you achieve better performance outcomes in jiu-jitsu and in life as well. Learning, having learned these methodologies. So if that's something that speaks to you, you can email me. That's also in the show notes. You can also read me on Substack, writing about life things, not necessarily jiu-jitsu things. I just wrote a short piece a couple weeks ago about the beginning of bow season here in the Northeast. Yeah, that's kind of been shot to shit too. I can't really, my right eye is my dominant eye, so I don't really feel confident in my shooting abilities right now. Hoping to get out maybe Sunday. But other than that, you can also come train at Princeton Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu if you'd like to. Come see Coach Emily, come see me, come see Shane McCarthy, our head coach. We welcome any and all academies. There's just a small drop-in fee. And then finally, check out Elizabeth Bass, who creates the artwork now for all these episodes. I really appreciate her keen eye and her level of abstraction and just the thoughtfulness that she brings to this whole process. Her Instagram handle is Lizka Learns. That's LIZKALEARNS. And once again, she has one of the most beautiful Instagram handle tags I've ever seen, and it's "This is my house. Take your shoes off." So yeah, this is the BJJ Meditations house, and here we're also a shoes off, not a shoes optional house. So I think perhaps that's how Liz and I kind of found each other. We're both just barefoot out there in the world. But anyway, thanks for listening. We'll talk soon, and train well.